Thank you very much for listening to this week's talk on the Sedra of miketz that we read on Shabbos Chanukah. And I would like to focus on the overall concept of the perfect balance and parallel of the spiritual and the physical worlds as a sort of general point. And then after that, to think about darkness and specifically 5 aspects of darkness. The first 4, which are, I would describe darkness as concealing, and the 5th, a darkness that reveals. So after that introduction, let's flesh it out. The idea of the harmony, the way spiritual and physical are in tandem as part of the perfect calibration of Hashem's world, is the way that at this time of year, we are just around the time of the winter solstice, the shortest in the Northern Hemisphere, the shortest days and the longest period of darkness. And this darkness, this physical darkness, this feeling of the obscurity that comes with early evenings, afternoon even, and this is not a comfortable time, especially if you think of times in history, not even history, in some parts of the world where they don't have light. The time of darkness is generally a time of greater challenge, even on the physical sense of just managing one's life, and it is just a symbol of challenge and difficulty. And I think that this is really something that is mirrored in the concept of Hanukkah that we are celebrating now. And although we celebrate Hanukkah with the lights, with the lights of the menorah, this is really how we cope with the darkness, how we banish, as it were, that darkness. And as with so often, we find that there's this perfect calibration between the sedras that we're reading and the time of year in the season, and also the period in the history that this is reminiscent, this recalls, and everything fits together in this amazing tapestry jigsaw as we get to behold it. So just looking at the opening words of this week's Sedra of miketz, chapter 41, verse 1, Vayehi miketz shenosayim yomim, and it was at the end of 2 years to the day. This is how the word Yomim is translated by the Saperstein Chumash, and it is asking for some kind of translation because the word appears to be redundant in as much as we know it's 2 years. So we know that 2 years are comprised of days. Ufaro cholem, and Pharaoh was dreaming, Vehine omed, and behold, he was standing al hayar, and he was standing over above the canal, the channel, and this refers to the channels that came off the Nile River that used to irrigate the fields in Egypt. And there is a connection. We have this idea of smichot haparshiot, the paragraphs that precede, there is always going to be some kind of connection that gives us an insight into what we're reading. And this extra 2 years, this mention of 2 years, follows on from the end of last week's Sedra of Vayeshev, chapter 40, and that tells the story of Yosef HaTzadik in prison, and he has been approached by the chief butler and baker to interpret their various dreams, which Joseph does. He interprets these dreams, and it effectively turns out the real life situation follows his interpretation, and the butler is restored to his position and the baker is hung. And before the butler leaves prison, he begs the butler to remember him, and he is a little bit too focused on this request, and the the Sedra ends, Pasuk 23, V'lo zochar sar hamashkim es Yosef vayishkochehu. And the butler, the chief of the butlers, did not remember Yosef, and he forgot him. And Rashi comments on this, V'lo zochar sar hamashkim, the chamber of the cupbearers did not remember, Bo bayom, on that day. So in the euphoria of liberation, we could argue that the butler just ran out of jail and forgot all about his friends, his friend Yosef in particular, the Jewish dream interpreter who told him the good fortune that awaited him, and he ran out and forgot all about it. And then this word that seems to, on the face of it, not really be adding very much, and he forgot him, but we already know that he didn't remember him. Vayishkachehu, and he forgot him. La'achar mikein. Mikan, afterwards, Mipnei Shetala by Yosef, since Yosef depended on him, Lezochra, to remember him, Huzkak Lios Asor, he had to remain in prison, Shtei Shonim, 2 more years, Shenema, as it says, Ashrei Hagever, fortunate is the man, Asher Som Hashem Mitacho, who has placed his reliance upon Hashem, Velo Fana El Rahavim, and has not turned to the arrogant ones. Velo Botach al Hamitzrim, and did not rely upon Egypt, Hakruim Rahav, which is called arrogant one. So, because Yosef was relying on the butler to plead his case before Paro, and he was stressing this and asking too much, this is something that was the reason for Yosef to be punished, and he had to spend an extra 2 years in jail. And I would like to suggest that this is the first element or first aspect of darkness, and that is the reliance on people, especially people who are not necessarily well disposed and do not plead your cause. And when you are putting all your hopes in these people, or in effect any one human being, even human beings, people who are very much on your side, they are limited as human beings, and they are not going to necessarily be able to do everything that they want to do. And this, it sounds very harsh that Yosef should be reprimanded in this way by having an extra 2 years on what must have seemed like an insufferably long period in jail, that Yosef was struggling with the justice of his circumstances in jail. And so I think that this is the lesson that we learn, and it sounds very harsh, but perhaps human beings have a natural tendency to put all their hopes in people, especially people in high places who might be able to do favors. And we really think that this leader or that leader or this person who has the ear of someone important might be able to help me. And really it is about having that understanding that our salvation comes from Hashem, and this was the lesson. This was the kind of darkness that we experience, that we read about in the opening words of this Sedra, and we put it together, we connect it with the event that happened at the end of last week's Sedra. That is the first aspect of darkness that emerges from the portion that we read of miketz. The second aspect of darkness that I think emerges from the Sedra of miketz, the preceding Sedra of Vayeshev as well, is the darkness of the Milchemet Achim, which I'm going to use that term, which literally means a war of brothers, known in English as civil war. And we see that civil war effectively happening between Yosef and his brothers. And every year it is no less painful and shocking to read about it. And this is, again, with the parallels of the events in the Torah and subsequent events in history. We see that the Milchemet Achim that took place during the Hanukkah story, that the Misyavnim, the Hellenist Jews, who were largely responsible, possibly even more so than the actual Greek, the Greek authorities. It was the Hellenist Jews who caused the most trouble for those Jews who wished to remain faithful to the Torah, and I think that this has to be the most painful of realities. It's one thing when we have enemies and we struggle against our enemies, but it is so much more damaging when we are fighting, we have infighting, when we are fighting each other. And I think that this is the terrible darkness that we see both within the individual family of the children of Yaakov and many thousands of years later when we have the Hanukkah story and the events of the Hanukkah story. And this is the second aspect of darkness. The third aspect of darkness, I think that we can view the culture, the Hellenist culture, as a culture that relies, that emphasizes the external beauty to such a degree, and it masquerades as light because there is such an allure and attraction towards things and towards people that are beautiful. And the fact that this becomes a culture that is synonymous with the terrible persecution that was meted out to the Jewish community at the time of the Hanukkah story. That on the one hand, a culture that seems to be creating and making the world a beautiful place, and this is a good thing, really, in many ways. Yet, on the other hand, when it is divorced from spiritual content, when there is this cruelty, if something is not externally beautiful, then it has no value, that this becomes a perversion and this becomes ugly. And I think that this is a form of darkness, and I think that we may not have the decrees of the Greeks and the Syrian Greeks to contend with, and we don't have the challenges and the limitations that were imposed on the Jewish communities at the time of the Hanukkah stories, but we are living in a culture where you could say that the emphasis on superficial beauty, the priorities, the resources, everything that is so focused on the external. And really, this is a form of darkness. This is something that we need to combine with spirituality. It cannot just be the focus on the external. And we actually see this in a pasuk in Bereshis, which is just after which is in the Sedra of Noach, and that is chapter 9 in Bereshis, and it's verse 27. And this is after Noach comes out of the ark with his family, and he plants a vineyard, he becomes drunk, and his one of his sons, Canaan, uncovers him, and the other two, Shem and Japheth, cover him and treat him in a much more respectful fashion. When Noah wakes up, he curses Canaan, and then he says that Baruch Adonai Elohei Shem, blessed is Hashem, the God of Shem, V'yihi Hanan Eved Lamo, may God, and Canaan shall be a slave to them. Yaft Elohim leyefes, may God extend Yefes, V'yishkein ba'ohalei Shem, and may he dwell in the tents of Shem. And I think what we have here is a highlight of the problem, that we see that this word yaft, which is the progenitor of Yavan, the word yafa, yafeh, is a derivation, shares a root with yaft, and this is the beauty of Yavan, the beauty of the temples, of the art, of the architecture, of the sculptures, of the focus on physical perfection and physical beauty. But this needs to dwell ba'ahale shame, in the tense of shame, which is the synonymous with the connection to Hashem, that this is not, that the beauty is not an end in itself, but a means to an end, a means, a way of helping people to feel in a better place, and then taking that positivity into deeper and more fulfilling and spiritual places. So I think that the culture that of Yavan, that is associated with the time of the Hanukkah story, that is the third type of darkness, because it has such a bright appeal, but really, when it is not combined with spiritual depth, then it becomes the opposite of light. It becomes great darkness. And the fourth concept of darkness is the darkness of exile. And when we sing Ma'oz Tzor on Hanukkah, we actually refer in each stanza to a different exile. And these exiles are, as it were, encoded into the very beginning. And we go back to Bereshith chapter 1, verse 2, and the Pasuk reads, V'ha'aretz haisa sohu vavohu, and the earth was empty and chaotic. V'choshech al panei sahom, and darkness over the surface of the deep. V'ruach Elohim merachefes al panei hamayim, and the breath of God was hovering upon the surface of the waters. And the Medrash in Bereshith Rabbah, chapter 2, 5, explains as follows: and the land desolate, so this is Sohu, this is Golos Bovel, Vavohu, void, this is Golos Modai, Choshech, darkness, this is Golos Yavan, which is Greece, and the deep, this is Golos Edom, the exile that we are currently in, which is associated with the nation of Rome. And we see a progression through history of these various nations that exile. The irony of the Greek so-called exile is that the Jewish people were not evicted from the land of Israel, in contrast to the other exiles, which were exiles. But we can see that when we do not have the spiritual connection with Hashem, that is an exile, even if physically we may be in our land. The desertion by so many of Jewish people who defected to the Hellenist way of life, and irrespective of the fact that they still remained in the land of Israel, this made it an exile, just like those exiles where we were physically evicted. And I think that we can certainly see that this idea that sometimes, if you think, gosh, it's not so bad, at least we haven't been thrown out of our own land, that again, that is covering over the depths of the darkness that comes from identifying with a worldview that is so antithetical to the worldview of Torah. And this, I think, is the fourth type of darkness, the fourth perspective of darkness that we can understand when we think about Choshech at this time. The fifth aspect of Choshech, of darkness, in contrast to the first four, that are types of darkness that conceal the truth, that conceal the light. The fifth aspect of darkness is that that physical truth of darkness, that when you think about stars or the moon, in order to see them shining so brightly, and not just because my personal experience wanting to take a picture of the moon, I need to have a beautiful, dark, clear night. And the darker the night, the brighter the moon and the stars will shine. And really, it is darkness that reveals, darkness that enables us to see that these celestial, these heavenly bodies that are just as much there during the day, but we can't see them during the day. But we see them more clearly at night. And I think that this is reminiscent of a very beautiful concept that comes returning to the opening verse of our Sedra of Miketz, Vayehi Miketz Shenosayim Yomim, and it was at the end of these 2 years that the terrible, challenging time that Yosef experienced in the prison, and possibly, even though there is an explanation of Yomim as that Yosef was on such a high level that he treated those extra 2 years as if they were a day. He saw it in terms of days rather than years. But I think we can also imagine that extra time after he felt that freedom was so close, when he made a friend in the butler, and the butler went free, and the butler was going to mention him to Paro, and then nothing happened. And each of those days of those 2 years could potentially have dragged more and more painfully. Yet they came to an end. Those 2 years, that time that Yosef had to learn the extra lesson, that we all learn that extra lesson as we go through these events with Yosef. And then he comes out, as it were, into the light. And there's a very beautiful posuk in Eov that says, Kates som lachoshech. He puts an end to the darkness. And I think that this is the darkness of hope, the darkness that beholds the moon and the stars and the promise of Hashem. And just like Yosef emerges into the bright, dazzling light, he goes from dungeon to deputy, as in a click of a finger, keheref ayin, in the blink of an eye. And this is something that we can think of this darkness as darkness that reveals. We can think of this darkness as darkness that gives us hope. And we can pray that the light of our experiences, the light of our learning, and the light of our connection to all the values and the events in the Torah, that they will help us reach a stage where we can behold the light of Moshiach, and we can behold the light of redemption. And may this happen very speedily and in our time. And wishing everybody a very bright Hanukkah and a beautiful Hanukkah, and Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for listening.